Hey, what's up guys? Brian Kelly here from Zombie Guitar. Here in today's video, I just want to talk about how to arpeggiate a chord progression. So a lot of people have questions about what an arpeggio is, and is that somehow different than chord tone targeting? And when it comes to soloing, people have a lot of questions about like this triad soloing and stuff like that. So before I kind of walk you through what I was doing in the demo there, I just kind of want to clear up all this stuff. So what is an arpeggio? Basically, an arpeggio is just where you play the notes of the underlying chord. That's it. For example, you could just play a C major chord like this. But then if you wanted to arpeggiate that C major chord, you would just play the notes individually, like... That's it. That's what an arpeggio is. So the notes that make up a C major chord are C, E, and G. So you can just play C, E, and G anywhere on the fretboard and you're arpeggiating a C major chord. That's literally all it is. So if you've watched my last like 300 videos or so, surely you've heard me talk about this layer 1 and layer 2 stuff when it comes to soloing. Layer 1 is where you just focus on the key. You don't really care about the underlying chords. You just care about what key it is. Once you know what key it is, you can kind of solo using the different scale patterns and stuff. Layer 2 is where you focus on the chords and you try to hit the notes of the underlying chords as the chord changes are occurring. So today's lesson is purely about layer 2. This is all about the underlying chords. So when I talk about chord tone targeting or arpeggios, that's all layer 2 stuff. It's where we're focusing specifically on the chords. This chord progression that I use is actually a chord progression from one of my original songs, which is called 34. I'll actually post that at the end of this video if you want to check that out. It's a song I wrote like 3 or 4 years ago. I like it, so if you want to listen to it, that'd be cool. So let's now quickly talk about what triads are. So when it comes to soloing, a lot of people think that triad soloing means that you have to play like root, third, fifth of each chord in that exact order, and they think it's like just groupings of 3 notes, which makes sense because triad is a grouping of 3 notes. But when it comes to soloing, you don't just have to stick to 3 notes. You can play the 3 notes. You can play them in root, third, fifth order, or you can play them in root, fifth, third order, or third, fifth, root order, or whatever. You can play through multiple octaves. The main thing about this whole triad thing is that you're just playing those 3 notes and only those 3 notes. I actually did a full lesson about this. It's called Let's Talk About Triads. I'll post a link to that one below. If you're a member of the Zombie Guitar website, it's actually going to be in the chords section of the in-depth lesson portal. So you might want to check that one out too. So there's 4 types of triads. You have major triads, you have minor triads, you have diminished triads, and you have augmented triads. The most common ones that you're probably going to encounter, assuming you just listen to, mainstream music such as rock and classic rock and metal and pop and country and all that stuff, the most common types of triads that you're going to encounter are going to be major triads and minor triads. These are also just known as major chords and minor chords. So if I play a D major chord like this, that's just a D major triad. It's just 3 notes. It's D, F sharp, and A. If I play an A major chord like this, even though it spans 5 strings, it's still just 3 notes. It's A, C sharp, and E. Those are the 3 notes that make up a major chord, or the major triad, the 3 triad notes that make up an A major chord. E major chord is E, G sharp, and B. That spans all 6 strings, E, G sharp, and B. Some of those notes are repeated. Then we have the F sharp minor triad. F sharp, A, and C sharp. Again, those are the 3 notes that make up an F sharp minor chord. And then the 5th chord that was used in this song was a C sharp major chord. Alright, again, it's just 3 notes. It's C sharp, F, and G sharp. Just a little side note, sometimes you'll see a C sharp major chord written out as C sharp, E sharp, G sharp, which is kind of weird because you may be thinking like, isn't E sharp just an F? Why would you call it E sharp? Yeah, technically it's the same pitch, but there are instances where it makes sense to use the writing of E sharp as opposed to F. Just to keep things simple though, we're just going to call that note F. Alright, so C sharp major triad is C sharp, F, G sharp. Those are the 3 triad notes that make up a C sharp major chord. So the first way that I arpeggiated this chord sequence was to use major bar chords and minor bar chords rooted on the low E string. So I'm sure you've seen this shape before. This is a major bar chord rooted on the low E string. So anytime you see this shape, if you can remember where the 1, 3, and 5 is within the shape, you have 1, 5, 1, 3, 5, 1. All I did was I just took the 1, 3, 5 right here on the D, G, and B string. And that's that little triad found right in there, that little 3-note cluster of notes. It then moved down to the A major chord, same shape. Again, I took the notes in the D, G, and B string, the 1, 3, 5. And then it moves down to the open E major chord, which is a mix of open strings and fretted notes. It's the same shape though. So again, you just take the note on the D, G, and B string. It then moves to the F sharp minor chord. This is now the minor bar chord shape rooted on the low E string, which again is a movable bar chord shape which can be played anywhere. We're just playing it here on the 2nd fret. That's your note F sharp, so that is an F sharp minor bar chord. Again, I just took the notes on the D, G, and B strings here, and that's my 1, flat 3, 5 of that particular chord. That's the difference between a major chord and minor chord, is just the 3rd. Major chord is 1, 3, 5, or root 3, 5. Minor chord is root flat 3, 5. You just take the 3rd, you lower it by a half step, now you got yourself a minor chord. The progression then starts back over. You have the D major chord, so just these notes. Then the A major chord, these 3 notes. And then it moves up to the C sharp major chord. Again, you already know the shape. It's a movable shape. It can be played anywhere. We're just playing it here rooted on the 9th fret. So that's a C sharp major chord. Again, same thing. And then I just came up to this note up here, which is the note C sharp. There's an example of, you're still playing the triad, but you're repeating one of the notes. So it's root, 3rd, 5th, root. The second time around, I then used major and minor bar chords rooted on the A string. Again, these are movable shapes. All you need to know is just 2 shapes, the major bar chord shape rooted on the A string, and then the minor bar chord shape rooted on the A string. So this started out with a D major chord, because that's the first chord in the progression. So it's just like this. So if you remember where the 1, 3, and 5 is located within this particular shape, you have root, or 1. So 1, 5, 1, 3, 5. That's going to be the same no matter where you play the shape at. The interval location is always going to be the same. So for this, I just took the high 3 strings. I took the G, B, and high E strings. So you have your root, 3rd, 5th. All right. You then come down to the A major chord, which is the same shape. You're just now including open strings in it. So again, you have the high 3 strings, which is the root, 3rd, 5th. We then come up to the E major chord, rooted on the 7th fret of the A string, just the high 3 strings, root, 3rd, and 5th. And then we come up and we now play the minor bar chord shape rooted on the A string. Again, just the high 3 strings. Remember, the difference between a minor chord and a major chord is you just take the 3rd and you lower it by a half step. So your high 3 strings is, there's your minor 3rd. If it was an F sharp major chord, it would be like this. But you lower that 3rd by a half step to make it a minor chord. Then it goes back to the D major chord, again the high 3 strings. Then it goes to the A major chord, high 3 strings. And then it goes to the C sharp major chord. Alright, so again, this is a major bar chord rooted on the A string. You've already seen this shape, just playing the high 3 strings. Alright, so for this third part, we're now mixing up bar chords rooted on the A string and rooted on the low E string. So if you were able to follow along with the first and second parts, then you already know your major and minor bar chords rooted on the low E string, and you know your major and minor bar chords rooted on the A string. Now we're just mixing everything together. So the first one was a major bar chord rooted on the A string. We used that for the D major chord. And if you know your intervals, you know that this is a root 5, root 3, 5. All we're doing here is we're just going root 5, 3, or 1, 5, 3. And then for the second one, which is a major bar chord rooted on the low E string now, again, if you know your intervals, it's root 5, root 3, 5, root. Again, it's just root 5, 3. For the next chord, the E major chord, that's a major bar chord shape rooted on the A string, root 5, 3. And then for the F sharp minor chord, that's a minor bar chord rooted on the A string, so root 5, flat 3. Back around again a second time, you have the D major chord, which is a major bar chord shape rooted on the A string, root 5, 3. A major chord is a major bar chord shape rooted on the low E string, root 5, 3. And then for the C sharp major chord, we used a major bar chord shape rooted on the A string, again playing root 5, 3. So then the next time around, I used caged shapes. So if you don't like the cage system, or if you don't like to refer to these shapes as C shape and A shape and E shape and all that stuff, I mean, just call them whatever you want. It's just arbitrary labels. That's all it is. But assuming that you do like to use the caged terminology, the first chord, this is a D major chord found in the E shape. And we just played root 3/5 right here on the D, G, and B string. The next chord was an A major chord played in the C shape. And I just played the notes on the D, G, and B string for that one as well. And then we went to the E major chord, so this is an E major chord played in the A shape, and I just played the notes on the D, G, and B string as well. And then we moved down to the F sharp minor chord, and that is actually the C shape made minor. So the cage system, there's no such thing as the minor cage system. You just have the 5 cage shapes, and then you take those cage shapes and you can make them into minor chords by lowering the third. I have a whole lesson about that. It's called the minor cage system. If you want to check that one out, I'll link that one as well. Anyway, so here is the, we'll start off with an F sharp major chord in the C shape. But it's an F sharp minor chord that we want, so we need to take those thirds and lower them by a half step. So, alright. And I just played the notes on the D, G, and B string as well. So that's the F sharp minor triad for that part. And then it was back on the D major chord again. So for that one, we played a D major chord in the A shape. Again, these are arbitrary labels. It's the major bar chord shape rooted on the A string. You could call this the A shape. Call it whatever you want. We're just using caged terminology for this part of the video. So this is a D major chord in the A shape. So again, we're just playing the D, G, and B strings here. And then we move to the A major chord. This is played in the E shape. Again, we played the D, G, and B strings. And then we played the C sharp major chord, played in the A shape. Again, playing the D, G, and B strings. So for this next part, we played 2 octaves. We played root 3rd 5th, and then root 3rd 5th in the next octave. So the cool thing about the guitar is that everything's movable, so that's going to apply to any major chord or any major triad or any major arpeggio. You just kind of move it around. So the first one is a D major chord. So here's the note D starting on the A string right there, 5th fret. So, and then here's the third. That's always going to be the same no matter where you start. We just happen to be starting on the note D. 4 semitones higher is where your major third is going to be. So D, F sharp, and then your 5th is going to be here. That's a power chord, root 5th. Alright, so root 3rd 5th. And then right where the 5th is, you go to the next string. That's where your root is again. Wherever you have your root, your major third is always going to be found 4 semitones higher. So, and then your 5th is up here this time because of that weird B string. So there's your first one. Everything on the B string gets shifted up by a fret. I know, that's the guitar for you. And then for the next one, we started this one on the low E string. So we started on this A here, 5th fret. So you have your root. Your major third is always going to be found 4 semitones higher. And then your 5th is always going to be found here, like a power chord. So root 3rd 5th. Where your 5th is, your root's always going to be found on the next string on the same fret. Third's going to be found 4 semitones higher, and then your 5th is here. We don't have to deal with that weird B string situation when you're playing these arpeggios starting on the low E string, so it's a little easier to do it that way. The next chord is the E major arpeggio, so that's going to be the same exact shape as what we did for the D major arpeggio. For the D major arpeggio, we did this. Now we're just moving it up 2 frets. Everything on the guitar is movable. So now we're playing a 2-octave arpeggio starting on the A string like this. Alright, everything on the guitar is movable. That's the cool thing about guitar, in my opinion. Alright, and then we have the F sharp minor chord. So for that, we started on the A string. So start on the note F sharp. There's an F sharp right there, 9th fret. Now you have a minor third, not a major third, because the difference between a minor arpeggio or a minor triad or a minor chord, the difference between major and minor is just the third. So you have your F sharp. Your minor third is going to be 3 semitones higher or 3 frets higher, as opposed to 4 frets higher. So but the fifth is going to be the same. It's just the third that changes. So root, flat third, fifth. And then where the fifth is, you then have your root on the same fret, but the next string up. So minor third is 3 semitones higher, 3 frets higher. And then we got to deal with that weird B string situation. So alright, that's the F sharp minor chord. Back around again, starting on the D major chord, A major chord, and then we have a C sharp major chord. And we've already played major arpeggios starting on the A string, so that's all we did for this one. We just started on the note C sharp now. Root, third, fifth, root, third, fifth. Same shape we used for the D major arpeggio and the E major arpeggio. We just started on the note C sharp now. And then we just ended by coming up here to this C sharp again, which would be the root or the one, whatever you want to say. So alright, then this next part is sometimes referred to as the Sultans Triads. This is what Mark Knopfler does at the end of Sultans of Swing. He just uses like the high 2 strings. This is all just coming from the C shape. That's all we're doing here. It's the major chords are just the C shape of the cage system, if you want to label it that way. And then for the minor chord, for that F sharp minor chord, it's just the C shape made minor. That's all it is. So if you take this D major chord played in the C shape, so the note D up here, you put your pinky on that note, this is the D major chord played in the C shape. And then if you come up here, that's also part of the triad, the 3 triad notes. You just take the high 2 strings of that, and here's your root, third, fifth. It's not exactly the same way that Knopfler played it in the Sultans of Swing, but you get the idea. Kind of just come up with a cool rhythm and play it like that. So that's the first chord. That's the D major chord. Then the A major chord, again, you take your pinky, you put it on the note A, right there, 12th fret of the A string. A major chord in the C shape. Again, same thing. And then you come down to the E major chord. So start on the note E, take your pinky, put it right there, 7th fret of the A string. So there's the E major chord. And then the F sharp minor. Take that, put it on the note F sharp, 9th fret of the A string. You have to lower all your thirds now because it's a minor triad as opposed to a major triad. So it's not an F sharp major. It's an F sharp minor. You just take the high 2 strings. Alright, so that's the F sharp minor chord. It then starts back over on the D major, A major, and then C sharp major. Pinky, put it on that note C sharp. And right there, 16th fret. This is a C sharp major chord played in the C shape. Just the high 2 strings. So I was just going to stop the solo there, but I was having fun noodling around with this chord progression, and, it kind of ended up like right here. And then I was just like, oh, cool. And I was like, oh, there's pentatonic position number 4 for this key. I love pentatonic position 4. It's my favorite position to play in. So for the key that we're playing in, this is the key of A major or the key of F sharp minor, whatever you want to call it. If you call it F sharp minor, put that on the note F sharp on the A string. If you call it the key of A major, put that on the note A on the A string. There's F sharp, 9th fret of the A string. There's A on the A string. So there's your pentatonic position 4. On the Zombie Guitar website, I also call this the A string home box. For that one video that I did a few weeks ago about the 3 pattern method, this would be the second of the 3 patterns. Whatever you want to call this, whatever label you want to assign to this particular pattern, here it is. So here's your... And the notes in the low E string are part of it as well. So I was just kind of noodling there, and I was just kind of highlighting the chord tones as the chord changes occurred. So the first chord was a D major chord, D, F sharp, A. So we started on the note F sharp. The second chord was an A major chord, A, C sharp, and E. So came down to the C sharp here. Third chord is an E major chord, E, G sharp, and B. So we came down to the G sharp here. fourth chord was an F sharp minor chord, F sharp, A, C sharp. So we played the F sharp there. And then the second time around, we came back up to this F sharp up here, which again was played over the D major chord. So that's a chord tone of the D major chord, D, F sharp, A. This is the note F sharp. Came down to here, which is the note C sharp. That's a chord tone of the A major chord, A, C sharp, and E. And then slid up to here, which is the same note. This is a C sharp. This is a C sharp. It just kind of sounded cool to slide up to, instead of going, whatever. Just a C sharp played over the C sharp major chord, which is a chord tone of that chord. Alright, so there's a million bazillion ways to arpeggiate a chord sequence, but the main thing that I want you to understand is what exactly that means, and hopefully after watching this video you know what that means. So if you don't know all your notes on your fretboard, you can either use shapes, which is kind of what we were doing here, these movable chord shapes, and just know where your root, third, and fifth locations are within the shapes that you're using. You could also memorize all the notes on your fretboard. If you don't know all the notes on your fretboard, you could just go to Google and just look up a fretboard diagram that displays all the notes on the fretboard, kind of have that posted, printed out, whatever, stapled to your wall, something like that. And then as the chord changes are occurring, you just play the notes that make up each individual chord. And then if you don't know the notes that make up each individual chord, again, you could easily find that on Google. Just search what notes make up chord 1, what notes make up chord 2, so on and so forth. It'll take a little bit of practice, a little bit of work, but yeah, that's the general idea of this whole thing. So thank you for watching, and if you want to stick around to check out my original song, maybe you've heard this one before, maybe not, but here it is. See you next time.